Hello, welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you here for this episode. I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I've been a real estate investor, and I've taught philosophy at the undergraduate level. And I am a writer and a senior editor at Touchstone magazine. Enough about me. How about you, Tom?
I'm Tom Price. I teach theology, Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, philosophy and Christian thought at a few other places as well.
All right, Glenn.
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a professor emeritus of history at Central Connecticut State University. I am a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I work for Reflections Ministries as well, and I've got my own 501c3 called Every Square Inch Ministries at esquareinch.org.
Great. Well, today it's just us guys, and it happens to be my day for the theme of the show. And I've decided I want to talk about techno-utopia or techno-utopians. That's better, techno-utopians. I've been developing some theses concerning techno-utopianism. And the reason I've been doing so is because I've been thinking so much recently about transhumanism. I've been reading, books by transhumanists. I've been doing a deep dive on artificial intelligence, just trying to understand what we're talking about here. Some of the things that I'm learning have put certain questions to bed, but have raised other questions in my mind. And we can maybe get into some of those. Some of the things that I think people are worried about are red herrings, but there are some things that people aren't thinking about that are really, really dangerous. So there's all that. But in the course of this, one of the things you see is that there's really no sort of like unified vision of the future that people who are involved in artificial intelligence share. There are different schools of thought. There are kind of sort of subcultures within the movement to bring, us into kind of a new world that's in which artificial intelligence plays a significant role, if not a dominating role. And one group in that larger sort of community, I would call techno-utopians. These people tend to be, well, generally speaking, people who are in that world tend to be materialists. And their understanding of, say, intelligence has to do with some sort of emergent property that can develop within sort of the course of of sort of nature's working itself out in different ways. And artificial intelligence is a way to create a form of intelligence which is not informed by any kind of transcendent point of influence, namely God, but just through material conditions and the developing technologies that simulate the kind of the work of the human mind. And what you learn in the process too is that the stuff that they're developing in some way is inspired by the human mind, but in other ways is very, very different than the way we think and reason. So the term intelligence would just basically be a broad term that can be used to classify both what humans do and what machines do, at least in their way of thinking. But in the midst of all this, there is a kind of as I noted, a subgroup or a subculture that I refer to as techno-utopians. I've heard them referred to as digital utopians. Mark, or I should say Max Tegmark, in his book Life 3.0, identifies them as one of the sort of subcategories or subcultures within the artificial intelligence community. And people in that group would be people like, Ray Kurzweil or Yuval Noah Harari, and they're just a couple of them. I think they're obviously well known and important. But as I've reflected on, what makes these guys tick, I've identified these six sort of characteristics that sort of I think help us to understand what their basic core commitments are ways of thinking are that kind of inform their outlook. So I like to explore those and just talk about them. This is a work in progress, so it's not as though these are, the final form that these theses will take. But I also want to add parenthetically at this point, I've run across people in the Christian world that I think resemble these guys and share at least some aspects of the way of thinking and looking at the world that these guys uh, um, can be said to be known for. Anyway, so that's the task. And before I jump into anything, I wonder if you guys have anything you want to say before we get into the weeds.
Well,
Glenn, you go first.
yeah, I'm curious where you're going with this, because there's so many different variations on what techno-utopianism might look like. I've done some work in transhumanism and what you can call techno-Gaianism and a whole host of other things. I'm just really curious where you're heading.
Yeah,
Sure.
and similarly, where it springs from, that's going to be interesting too, because a lot of these visions grow out of deformations of Christian contributions, whether it's the perfecting of grace perfecting nature, whether it's taking our endowments like having dominion and taking them to extremes without consideration of creation. There's a whole lot of things. I actually similarly did a talk a couple of weeks ago on Babylon Retrieved, the way in which dominion, our endowment and calling to have dominion, goes back to kind of what happens after the fall when we get Babylon. So I'm curious about where this will take us.
Well, that's a good place to begin our, sort of like the whole matter of reflecting on this, because what I'm getting at is technology. Right. So we wouldn't have civilization at all if we didn't have technology. So this is not a diatribe against technology. This is a way of thinking about technology that I think is troublesome or troubling, and is in a real way presents us with the possibility that the tools that we have used to serve us end up becoming our masters. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. Now, if we think about technology in Scripture, you could say the first great sort of communal project is Babel, right? I mean, here we have a story about the construction of a tower, but to put this in the proper frame of reference, architecture, right? We're talking about technique. We're talking about techne. We're talking about making. We're talking about the human and cultural procedures by which we bring things into being. And in this case, you have a kind of a satirization of what is going on, because there's a series of contrasts that are made. We're told that they make the tower out of bricks, not out of stone. In other words, they've created the materials and they use bitumen instead of mortar, or as mortar. And what you have then is a kind of approach to building that is one step even further away from sort of the natural order than is often the case when you're just using native stone, even if you dress it and so forth. But so you've got that kind of noted in the description of the project. But the project itself has a set of ends which are really troubling. First of all, the people are building the tower to reach the heavens, and that in and of itself is intended to tell us something about them. There's a kind of apotheosis that's involved here. There's a self-divinization process.
There is, it's similar. It's one of the things I talked about too, is that take your original endowments in the garden, right? In one sense, to be an image bearer of God is to be made for glory. It is to be made as we glorify God, to be the kind of radiating light of that glory, to participate in that glory. And in a sense, we're fulfilled in that, and the life manifesting presence of God overflows into creation as we govern, direct, and attend to it. When the fall happens and we start to get to see human beings united in their, in a sense, rebellion of God, what hasn't gone away? Well, their endowment for glory. But what it does is it now becomes self-focused, right? Fame is the translation, right? We'll build this tower so that our name will be recognized. And Nimrod, of course, isn't that very much tied with his whole notion?
Right.
Well, let me throw one little footnote in here. Actually, the earliest development we get in technology is in Cain's line.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, the son of Lamech, right? Tubal Cain.
Earlier on, we're seeing now that's not major projects, but basic technological development occurs in the line of Cain, which I find
something worth
a really interesting point.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, the musical arts as well as even agriculture, husbandry. So all of the sort of the fundamental sort of building blocks of civilization, you could say, the arts and the sciences and agriculture are right there in the progeny of Cain.
And you get a affirmation by God with Abel on what you do with that material versus Cain. That looks it looks like from the surface, Cain's doing the right kind of thing with the right kind of material. So it really, there's a lot going on here that sets the stage for what comes with Babel, right? I mean, here's a competitive relationship. Abel gets recognized, right, by God. He doesn't, or doesn't with the acceptance, and it creates fratricide.
Right. And one of the things I think that these two stories help us to see is the spiritual character of our technological sort of aspirations, but also the questionable basis for them, that there's something maybe even at the very root that is troubling or a problem. It's not as though technology is just sort of this thing that we find sort of on the ground and pick up and then put to use in ways that we would like, but maybe there's a trajectory that's already built into certain things.
Well, you notice also that they unified in this technological vision and in this shared sense of how we're going to be exalted in it. And so what you have is almost an attempt to spiritually redeem themselves, reunite after the fall and its brokenness around this kind of spiritual center through which our own ingenuity and our own kind of excellence, if you will, unified together can achieve. And this is why it receives a judgment on the other end that lasts until Pentecost and its reversal, right? In the sense that here is God's way of unifying and God's way of dealing with this. And it's not going to come about through this self-made building of the tower.
And you see this, this contrast in Genesis 11 and then 12, where, they say they're going to make a name for themselves. And then God comes to Abraham and says, I will make a name for you. So they're and a people and all of that. And all the people of the earth will be blessed. Yeah, Abraham. All the people.
Abraham is from the line of Shem, which means name.
Well, that's great. That's a great point. Yeah. But another thing to remember when we see, the Lord come down to observe what they're up to. And by the way, in the Bible, whenever the Lord comes down, it's not a good thing. It's usually a sign that he's about ready to tell everybody, okay, the party's over, get out of the pool. And that's what he does here. Is he makes there's an aside, and the aside is if this is what they are up to. When they all can kind of work together this way, when they share a common language and so forth, he says nothing will be impossible for them. This is God's own judgment. So the sort of the preamble to the curse of Babel is this assessment of their potential. He says, they really are going to be able to pull off all kinds of stuff because, after all, we're made in God's image. There really is an upside to what we can pull off. So sometimes when people say to me, for example, in this case, when I talk to them about artificial intelligence, and there's this dismissive, well, it'll never happen. It's technically impossible. And I just think, well, that's what we said about flying. That's what we said about, telecommunications. I wouldn't put it past us to pull something pretty close, pull it off, something pretty close to what these folks are envisioning. So anyway, but these are great. And by the way, one of the people that got me thinking about all this stuff years ago was Jacques Ellul. You remember Jacques Ellul and the Technological Society and the politics of God, politics of man, all this. He makes all these, the meaning of the city. He makes all of these observations. And he was a reformed thinker. He was maybe a little too Bardian for the tastes of most folks, but and nevertheless, a lot of the stuff that he's doing in his work, even from the perspective of non-Christians, is really profound and insightful, and he's almost always drawing directly on Scripture when he's assessing things. So anyway, thinking about techno-utopianism, techno-utopian. So here's and again, these are very rough statements, so I don't have them entirely worked out, but I need to get them in a pithy form. So maybe you guys can help me with that. But the first has to do with the nature of knowledge. Obviously, the Baconian truism, knowledge is power. But, and this is something that Michael Hanby helped me to see, a couple years ago. When we say that, what we're implying is that only things that give us power can be considered knowledge. So knowledge becomes the measure, or I'm sorry, power becomes the measure of knowledge. If a form of knowledge does not confer power, we don't consider it genuine knowledge. So, for example, there are lots of things that I know that don't help me to control my world or other people, but nevertheless, I know these things. For example, I know my wife. Does knowing my wife imply power? Well, maybe in a certain limited sense, you could say, okay, I know what makes her happy. I know what makes her sad, and maybe I can have some power over her moods because of that. But is that what I mean when I say I know my wife? No, that doesn't mean that at all. It means that there's a kind of knowledge that I have of her that I can't share with other people because of its character. It doesn't have currency. Nevertheless, it is real knowledge, but within the Baconian framework of knowledge is power, and anything that can't be described as or seen as conferring power is not knowledge, and that's in a real sense, because it doesn't have currency and it doesn't help us exercise control over the physical world, is not real knowledge. And so there is a kind of bias toward power with techno-utopians. Okay, so that's one.
And there's we've talked about it a lot, but there's a long way of getting there. I mean, when omnipotence, all powerfulness, becomes the predominant emphasis in a lot of the theological strand, it becomes central to the human. It becomes central to nature. So there's a lot of seed being thrown to set that up over a long period of time, and so that's one thing. So power is really what is most fundamental about anything. And then the other aspect you have is, I think Hanby hits on this. I think George Grant, the famous Canadian philosopher who wrote a lot on this.
Not our friend George from Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm sure he would agree with him on this, and some others, that basically technology is the ontology of the modern scientific age. And what they mean is, technology here is not understood merely as taking the potential that God has given and basically unpacking it in accordance with things that are related to what that thing is for in a good way, but it is a kind of exploitative knowing that you're almost breaking into something. So the knowledge you get comes from the actual wresting the power from the thing you're learning about. Right. So something in nature, you're wrestling what makes it what it is, and harnessing the power that it is, and that's what becomes the sort of significant knowing, so that we can direct it, manage it, control it, shape it, bend it, for Bacon. And again, I always say, here is a mad truth gone wild, because for Bacon, this was a return to the Adam before the fall, having an encyclopedic knowledge in which, through our harnessing dominion over things, we are able to control and direct and heal what was broken with the fall.
Right. I think that, too, that this is where so much of Tolkien can be really helpful, because I really think that much of his writing is an exercise in reflecting on this particular matter, and you can contrast, say, Sauron and the elves in this way. Now, Fëanor is an interesting kind of a character in the Silmarillion because he's really kind of borderline in this respect. But when we think about, say, the Elven rings, the rings of power that Sauron did not forge, they were forged by the elves. They all have a kind of preservative character. And if you look at the tech, if we want to call it that the elves, the cloaks, lembas, these different things that they make, they are much more sort of an extrapolation upon the latency of things that have already been made and working with them, as opposed to a wrestling with and repurposing things in ways that are contrary to their natures, if you get my drift. So that's Sauron, but that's not elven tech. And remember there when the hobbits or even men or dwarves talk about elvish tech, they call it magic, and the elves are always, what are you talking about? This isn't magic. There's always this puzzled response. Because in fact, Galadriel says you use the same term for what the deceits of the enemy as you use for what we're doing, and she implies they have nothing in common.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and well, it's interesting because with Bacon, you see the beginnings of a kind of philosophically drawn out set of conclusions from a lot of these shifts that he sort of naturalized at this point. I mean, one of them with him is the shift from that with classic ways of thinking of natural philosophy, of course, especially after Aristotle influenced the West. You had the significance of the essence of something, what it is, and that helped draw parameters around what you could or couldn't do with it, right?
Right.
If your human being is made in the image of God, there are certain things you don't do with it, and there's certain things that help you unpack its purpose, its design, its end. This is bracketed out. These things are not seen as a matter of fact, Bacon himself will say, I'm not going to waste my time looking for these supposed essences, right?
Right.
This is what is it's a given now. It's not really a purpose, and it just so happens to be a given. And I would say he probably respects it in some way as a given. But he definitely is not related to it and so what you see is the old contemplative dimension, what something is and what it's for. I mean, remember the old classic philosophy, is it was the first question, is there a God, right? What is it? What's it for? Those are out of the picture now. What do we do with it? This becomes central. So this active use utilitarian way of knowing, what does it do for us in the end? What does it do? How does it do it? And how can we harness it to do it for us becomes the key point of focus, and the boundaries about something, why it was created and what is sacred to it, have been left out of the picture.
And
another question.
Go ahead.
Another question that's worth asking, especially when we're dealing with the kinds of technology we're talking about here, is what does it do to us?
Right. Yeah, that's actually one of the theses I want to get to. In fact, I'll make that the next one because there's no necessarily logical sequence. But to your point, Tom, the kind of thing that you're describing is when we know, say, the essence of something, it puts a limit on us, and actually it thwarts our programs or our objectives, and so it's disempowering, and maybe that's why we don't want to know about it. In other words,
that's it.
Yeah.
So think of the commandments on you shall not murder, right? I mean, now that we have the technical capacities to euthanize and mercy killings and do all these things, nevertheless, that was a boundary set on what something is and its sacredness that is now just, unless you want your life, unless you choose that your life is valuable, then you should be able to take your own life, or someone else should be able to mercifully kill you if you can't consciously do it.
So everything that can be labeled as spiritual in character, or an appreciation for the meaning of things or the essences, these things are subjective in this way of looking, and objective things are necessarily always material in character. So in other words, there's a kind of bias to materialism in the way we think about knowledge today. But let's go to Glenn's observation, and I think this is an important one. This is another one of my theses. Tech only amplifies the power of the user. It doesn't in any way alter or change him. And what Glenn just noted is, no, that's not the case.
Well, you really see it. Mike Hamby talks about this as well. You really see it with the whole notion of artifact shifting, right? Instead of us kind of being creative and called to be co-creators, right, and develop culture and artifacts, right? These things are bound up with material natures that are bound up with meaning and the rest we've talked about. These things are goods, right? But what happens is the more we move towards this way of thinking only about use and how we can dominate and bend things, is our artifacts. We make this step. We go from where artifacts were supposed to mimic nature in some way, draw out of them and be consistent with them. What happens is the artifact starts to take on deeper emphasis, and now nature in some way is understood as basically one big artifact, right? The watchmaker, right? A machine, a mechanistic view. And then from that mechanistic view, we start to see ourselves as basically a machine and an artifact that can be tinkered with the way in which you could update a clock if you wanted to by adding or taking away through new technological creations.
This is kind of the paradox of this thesis, is that the idea that tech only amplifies, our power, but does not in any way alter us or make us subject to a power, fails to take even that sort of the basic matter into consideration that other people might use that against us, and maybe even the means by which it occurs is when we use use the things that they've made.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
well,
Glenn.
it with the things we know about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, it's already been well documented the degree to which social media, smartphone use, and things like that rewire brains, particularly for adolescents and teens. That's a well documented fact. It literally changes the structure of the brain,
and it's remarkable how few people take this into consideration with the next wave of technology. So if right now I've been reflecting on the nature of artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is really good for a number of things. I think it's a marvelous development, a powerful, an incredibly powerful tool. But I describe it this way. So like in, the early days of, the enthusiasm for nuclear power, there were children's games that were created that were intended to be educational toys that actually came with some radium. In other words, and so some of these toys have been labeled the most dangerous toys that have ever been made. They're toys that you could make your hair fall out. These different things, give you cancer. But we just gave this stuff to kids and said, "Hey, have a great time. It's going to be a learning experience for you." And
it
now we
would
look.
have been.
That's right. That's right. And it was, because these toys it took a while for people to realize that, no, this isn't a good idea. I think we're at that stage of artificial intelligence where everybody's sort of tinkering with this. And we're just very naive about how it could damage us, not just the society at large, but even us as individuals.
And go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, I'm about to go down a rabbit trail, so maybe you should go first.
Well, mine's a rabbit trail too. So maybe I'll throw this one out and we can weave back to the rabbit trail you're on. But I don't want to. I mean, again, it's one of these cases where I'd like to say this isn't going to happen, but I know enough now, reading sci-fi, but also seeing where things happen, where this is definitely coming. The world of robots, right? They're getting more and more human looking, more almost to the point if you're looking at a distance, you can't tell. Human acting, and with AI and conversations, the whole notion of there being created a substitute for real human relationships. I mean, both for lonely people, but also people sexually that don't want the consequences and baggage that come. All of this stuff is in the works. They're dreaming it up. And as soon as, I mean, think of a person who has had rough relationships and can have a quasi human relationship with something that doesn't have any of the consequence in terms of the things they're worried about. You know, this is scary terrain.
Do you remember the book that Doug Wilson published a little while back about the sex doll that got thrown away, and how much
Ellie Ride?
Yeah, and so how much sort of outrage there was over that. I mean, that is so tame compared to what I actually think some people in our churches are actually messing with right now. So I think Doug was in a sense very bold, sort of brave to sort of just present that in the form of a story. But it's already happened. So like you'll be online right now. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there are these chat boxes, these sex chat boxes that just pop up and try to seduce you into interacting with them.
With it.
Using artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So it used to be that, you'd get these these phone numbers where you'd actually talk to a human being and they would talk dirty to you over the phone. Now you don't even need that person. I mean, the chat box can do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and the chat box becomes one way, all of a sudden they can just call out to it, converse. But you could see as robots take off, these becoming substitute relationships.
It's already happening. Because I've done a deep dive on some of the sordid side, sort of features to this whole AI phenomenon. I've actually come across that stuff already.
Glenn
go
had
ahead, Glenn,
another rabbit trail.
This may or may not be part of your next 4 theses, but I just finished reading Rod Dreher's Living in Wonder. And he cites a book that I also read a while ago, Diana Pasulka's Encounters. And one of the things he points out, and actually Pasulka does too, is that people who are working on the high end of AI development believe that what they are doing is actually communicating with a non-material intelligence, a multi-dimensional higher intelligence thing that through AI they are communicating with. There's actually at least one guy who is doing a lot of the very technical work on this, who says that he is getting the information on how to do this by what amounts to being channeling this extra dimensional intelligence. Okay, so there is, if this is accurate, there's a potential that there's actually something very, very directly demonic here. And just a quick note, in response to the book review I did from Rod, I got a note which I'm going to anonymize. A woman went to a podcast interview that Rod and Paul Kingsnorth did at Beeson Divinity School. And the note I got said, she was talking with the person who sent me the note. He said, she told me that all this stuff that Rod is writing about the machine being a vector of demonic evil is true. She told this individual stories about the scientific community of which she and her husband are a part were just jaw-dropping. And that in her network among AI scientists, they're telling her that we are very, very close to a point of no return.
Yeah, one of the things that has been somewhat frustrating for me in my work in this is I'm reading some stuff by people who are, sort of part of the circle that you just described, Glenn, who are really the godfathers of AI. People like Jeff Hinton and Mustafa Salomon, and so people who are actually dealing with kind of the cutting edge of AI, and then you'll interact with somebody who thinks that he's a tech bro, but maybe is just the IT guy at his local, sort of medium-sized company, and those people tend to be very kind of curt and dismissive when anything like what you just brought up is mentioned. and then you ask them, what have you read? And are you familiar with this book or this book or this book? Do you even know, for example, who Ray Kurzweil is? And they'll just sort of, their faces will be blank. They don't actually know any of this stuff. They're dealing with a product as an end user. They're not dealing with kind of the sort of the community, the intellectual community that is very sort of tight and exclusive and hermetically sealed from the rest of us. And so they're actually less informed sometimes than people who are just reading books like Joe Allen's book, Dark Aeon, which gets into some of the things you're just talking about here, Glenn. So
yeah. And
just because you're in IT doesn't mean you have any clue what's going on.
Yeah. Pasulka also cites quantum computing. There's a person that she works with that is in quantum computing, and she believes that it's at the quantum level that these other intelligences will begin to communicate, that it occurs at the quantum level.
Well, isn't it Roger Primrose who believes that consciousness actually is at that level, the quantum level? In other words, it's a kind of an emergent feature in reality. And if we could have better. So when you think of Roger Primrose, you think about a world-class physicist and mathematician, and that's his thesis is that actually consciousness itself is a kind of quantum phenomenon.
Yeah.
Anyway,
which would explain why observation affects quantum behavior.
Yeah, it's an epiphenomenon, and in the end, it's still for them. Well, unless they wiggle out of it, it's still materialist.
Well, this is where we get into some weird stuff because, as I noted in the show that we just finished up with Reese, there's a kind of a parting of the ways in this world where even the materialists are kind of moving in two different directions. One in a direction is sort of Buddhist in the sense that consciousness is illusory, but in another in which some of these people who are materialists are actually kind of moving into a kind of neo-animism.
That's right. They have to either blend them into each other, like with a panpsychism or something like that, or they're it's just an emergent property. I mean, that's where the trend was for a long time. I think Nagel wasn't convinced of that. I mean, his famous article on what it's like to be a bat. I mean, the way in which they're irreducible, the language of what's going on the material level and what is experienced by the consciousness are not reducible in any sense of the word to each other.
And that's kind of what I'm picking up on in this world. You got people like Marvin Minsky, who's gone now; he's dead.
Yeah.
But we have these old materialists who are just kind of like dying off, and the new guys who are coming on the scene, who are their disciples, are actually much more open to the spiritual dimensions of reality, but they're going at it they're coming out on the other side of materialism. In other words, they're not returning to Christianity, except in certain rare cases.
Yeah, and the worst part is the kind of Christian answers they get tend to be the Cartesian modern embrace of a dualistic understanding, rather than the rich kind of either whether you're convinced of the hylomorphic line or a more Christian Platonism, which I think offer a much richer set of ways of dealing with it.
You're going to have to define hylomorphic for most of our.
Well, you're getting into David Bentley Hart stuff. I'm thinking.
Well, I haven't gotten to him yet, but the debate has been going on for a long time on this level. I mean, hylomorphism really is kind of what Aristotle brought to the world, that you'd never have spiritual essences except showing up in embodied material forms. Or let's put it this way, every kind of thing that you can identify as distinct, say a computer, a human being, a car, they have a form. And matter is formed a particular way. You never have pure matter like the modern world believes. The problem with matter in the old world is it always needs a mater, right? And needs a mother. It needs something to form and fashion it. Otherwise, it's just undifferentiated potential. There's nothing there really. And so what you have is a world of embodied. So hylo is just a word for wood. Hylo is the Greek word for wood, but it's the material stuff that is combined with a form, an essence, a human essence, or a rock, or a tree, or a car. So things come hylomorphically. They are material, particular things, but they share in a particular form wherever things show up that are. right?
Yeah.
And
So
so that view is that, that view though is that you cannot reduce
right.
the form to the matter.
Yeah, and this is something that John Lennox gets into in his
Yeah.
treatment of AI in 2084. But what I was getting at with David Bentley Hart was more the Platonic stuff.
Yes, and he's to. I mean, I know he gets a little out there, but to his credit, he's retrieved a lot of that tradition. Sometimes it gets a little out there,
Well,
but he has brought. Yeah,
I'm working through a couple of his books, and they're really very good. And
Yeah.
they're dealing with the question of consciousness. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, those are his best.
Well, anyway, just to throw out one word here, I describe the AI guys who are going in this direction as techno-pagans.
Yeah, I think techno-pagan is good. But to your original point about how the use of this stuff affects the user, I think just a couple of things I think would help to give people a sort of a handle on this. There's, of course, Lord Acton's famous statement, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. In other words, by using technical means to control other things, in some sense, you're being altered, and maybe in a bad way. And that's certainly what the Ring of Power is intended to help to develop or sort of present us with. Now, in that case, obviously, we're talking about something characteristic of Saran has somehow been bound up with the ring itself. But I do think that Tolkien was intending to say something about how the exercise of power affects us. And then, of course, when we think about the American founding, what's the premise behind our government's division of powers and everything and checks and balances? And that is basically you can't trust anybody with power. And it's not just because we're fallen, but because there's something about the use of power that brings to the surface or elicits from us the worst things in us. It's like when a person he's a great guy until he hit the lottery, and then he hits the lottery and you just see this monster emerge.
Well, this is interesting, as this taps into kind of what Glenn was talking about, is at the heart of, if you will, the most fundamental levels at which things are sourced, right, that we can get a hold of. It's being understood demonically as that kind of, that dark reality that doesn't have creation but has something else in store. And it's interesting here because if you think about the classic understanding of Satan and Lucifer in the fall, well, Satan has to go somewhere, right? He has to do something. He's going to take his endowments and take them to places that depend on the good creation, but distort it, create a parody of the real creation. This is understood really as an anti-creation in the sense that it's all about undoing its goods. And so on this level of what you would call the unreal city, it has enough reality from the truth in order to sustain itself and be there. But it has enough distortion and alternative there through its own redirecting of things to make it alluring and attractive, and yet it is all bound up with our undoing and our enslavement rather than it is about our flourishing and our union with God. So you could see the whole technological world under this kind of governance all about manufacturing a kind of dependent on the real creation, like I said, the mind or the human body for the robot or something, mimicking it, but then trying to blur the distinction between the natural created kind and the artificial kind, and therefore almost starting to set up a virtual way of relating to everything that allows us to get into it more and more detached from reality and creation, and therefore from truth and goodness for that matter. And so it is definitely a sinister result if for all the things it can pull off.
So we've only gotten to 2 of my theses, and we're in 45 minutes to the show. So let me just throw the other 4 out there, and we'll play with them as we want. So,
Okay.
in other words, we don't have to go into the same depth that we've done with the first 2, but I just want to throw the rest out there, and then let's just let it fly. So the first, just to remind people, is that the idea that knowledge is power turns power into the measure of knowledge. Okay, that's number 1. 2, the idea is that we can exercise, we can use our technology to exert control over our surroundings and remain unaffected by the what we're doing. So that's the second thing. So here's the third. The third is everything is an engineering problem. In other words, if we understand reality as strictly material in character, all of the problems that we're dealing with necessarily lend themselves to some kind of technical fix or technological fix. Another is technical development is always pure gain, not net gain. The idea being that every new technological device that's introduced to our society only enriches it and doesn't take anything away. This is the idea here is, again, pure gain as opposed to net gain. An example of net gain would be air conditioning is great, but now people no longer sit on the porch and in a convivial way at the end of the day to escape the heat in a house in the summertime in the South. One of the things, is air conditioning better than porches? Well, in certain respects, yes, it's better than porches. But did we lose some things when we no longer sit out, in the evening to cool down? Yes, we have lost some things. So net gain, but not necessarily pure gain. So let me just finish these other. I got two more to go. Yeah. Just two more to go. The next thing is related to this. Techno-utopians are blind to the ways that new tech incorporates us into the structures of meaning and control that are exercised very often by people we don't know are there. So, in other words, we get incorporated. And then the last point is that the failure to adopt the failure to adopt new tech is a moral failing. So this is something you get a lot. It's implicit, when somebody says evolve or progress or something like that. When you fail to sort of demonstrate the appropriate enthusiasm or jump on board quick enough, or maybe even hold on to something that's kind of considered inferior or out of date, you are not simply doing something that's your right to do and you're free to do, but you're actually morally you're failing morally, and you're not keeping up, and you're slowing us down in some sense. Anyways, those are the other four. So I'm sure there's plenty that you want to talk about, but I just wanted to get them all out. So, Tom, you were going to say something about.
Oh, it was a comment off of that. I was driving down the street the other day by the ballpark, baseball fields. It was still warm out and no one there. And it just hit me. These things, just when I was a kid, were packed with children out playing in playgrounds. And yeah, there were a few families on playgrounds. For the whole, kids are nowhere in sight playing, putting their imagination and learning how to fight and everything. They're doing none of that. Yeah. And it has to be having a huge effect long term on our social order.
Now, techno-utopians would call you a nostalgist.
Yeah,
they would say that you were an obscurantist.
That's right.
They would try to figure out all sorts of things that people can do now that they couldn't do before that are better.
I have a few names for them, but I'll keep them to myself.
but you get my drift is that they wouldn't even listen to you. They would just dismiss you. They would just write you off.
That's right. And then they'll pull out all the ways you're dependent on the technologies that I get the gains and losses and the utilitarian ways of trying to measure what's good or not and, what things we have. Fact is, we have been impacted by it, and there aren't kids out there on the baseball field. And so, maybe that is a nostalgia point now, and maybe we can at least get them back out there at some point. But
I'm with you on the nostalgia. I wasn't criticizing you at all.
But I think that it doesn't always have to be the either ors they put us into. Even though you can recognize when something has been lost that is of value and try ways to retrieve it, all the while still recognizing we're not going to go back to a situation where we don't have all the other things people are bound up with. And but the thing is just, I guess, the widespreadness of it. I mean, there are, on the levels of an individual Christian now or a Christian community, you definitely have you're confronting things all the time now of making those decisions, and then we're probably learning how do we become wise enough to see all the ways we're being impacted, because most of us don't even know enough about technology to know all the ways they're directing our appetites and appealing to us. And so there is a rich required spiritual process, I think, needed from Christian leaders and Christian practitioners to start being able to see these things the right way and then wean ourselves where they are unhealthy. But there are the other dimensions of which I think Glenn was talking about, the sinister extreme power centers of this, that we are going to be very feeble up against, even if we are even if we were to become like the new Mennonites and not go there. That's going to, like you said, there is going to be an either or decision at a certain point, and that's, we don't know fully what that looks like.
Yeah, getting to my thesis on the fact that when we adopt a new technology, we are incorporated into a structure of meaning and control. That's so obvious when it comes to the smartphone. Through our participation by adopting this technology, we're providing reams of data that are used to manipulate us and control us and influence us and get us to buy things and want things. It's only going to get worse with AI, because the ultimate objective of the Techno-Utopians is to literally connect us physically to AI through neural links and just a continuous stream of data. So here's the challenge with AI, just to kind of fill you in. So right now, the way AI learns is with data. So in other words, we're already dealing with kind of something derivative in character. Everything that it works with is stuff that's already been digitized. And what that means is that people like us have somehow translated what we know into digital form. It's already getting to the point where it's exhausting what's out there. I mean, as vast as the expanse of the cloud is, AI is already pressing up against the boundaries. What it needs is a more direct access to the physical world, particularly for AGI, artificial general intelligence. In order to have that, we need to carry our devices with us all the time. And what we see, it sees. What we feel, it feels. In other words, it needs to use us as a kind of modem, so to speak, so that the data that we're generating is actual data that is having to do with the physical world outside us. So we become part of this Internet of Things. There's a term that's used in different circles, the Internet of Things, so that physical things are now digitized under the control of the kind of the artificial intelligence apparatus. So that's the next step. They're actually working very hard on making that happen.
Yeah, that's what I meant by the parodying of nature with artifact of creation with demonic anti-creation, is that it depends on the genuine article in order to kind of gain what it has. It's living on, there's a symbiosis of some sort going on here. It can't do anything without it, and it's mimicking it, and yet it is not in any way bounded the same way.
So just to kind of get explicit with how this actually is being developed, literally there is a physical connection that they're trying to develop, and Neuralink with Elon Musk is at the heart of this. But there's another very important organization called Synchron, and what these businesses are doing is they're actually physically connecting AI to human brains, and there are success stories, if so to speak, when it comes to this. So the idea is that they actually drill a hole in your head and wire you to AI through a kind of neural connection that's, obviously wireless. But anyway.
Yeah, I think people don't actually understand the degree to which a lot of data is already being harvested. It's not just smartphones. Things like Skype. The Skype, your terms that you have to agree to says that it can listen, and it probably does listen to every conversation on Skype to harvest data that it can use for AI development, for its large language models and things like that, or natural language programming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's all over the place. Everything is being harvested.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
All
there's
right.
so much out there that just we've generated just with our show, but in other places as well. That I'm pretty confident that various well-developed AI sort of enterprises could mimic any one of us at any time.
Oh, yeah.
Get our voice down,
Oh
our
yeah.
appearance,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Well, this is what I mean about there's coming a time at which the ways of outrunning it or outpacing it or outsmarting it are first of all going to become much more difficult, if not impossible. You want to be framed for preaching the gospel, and they don't want to hear you. Just mimic this. You put together anything now and convince enough people that the case against you is just.
So we've all been subject to phishing scams on email.
Yeah.
Well, let's take it to another level. What about FaceTime? What if I were to get a FaceTime call from you, Tom?
Yeah.
In other words, and it wasn't you. It was just complete. It was a deep fake, and you were, trying to share with me something terrible that had happened to Sandra and your need for financial assistance, maybe to help you get past it. And next thing you know, I'm thinking I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And I could even ask you questions, and you'd be able to respond. In other words, this avatar would be able to respond and know enough about you to be able to give me some sense that I'm really talking to Tom.
Yeah, well, you're seeing that. I get all these things, links to a lot of kind of musical things, and there's all this stuff of taking the voice of one artist and putting the lyrics from another to it, and it sounds, except to probably the best kind of recording ear, it sounds very close. So getting the voice and putting a different conversation in its mouth like that is it's here.
Yep. Anyway, so go for it, Glenn. I know you wanted to say something.
Well, there's also a rather interesting use of I think they call it limited AI, where the AI works with just a single database.
Right.
So, for example, this is something that they're working on with Ken Boa. Ken has a massive, unbelievable amount of material that he's got that has been digitized. There's video, there's all kinds of things. And so they're working on, it may actually be already implemented, where there's limited AI where you can ask a question and it will go through all of Ken's material and give you Ken's answer to it. And it'll do this virtually instantly.
Wow. Yeah. And there are so many great uses of AI. I don't want anyone to come away from this show thinking that it's irredeemable or intrinsically evil. For example, the DeepMind CEO, Dennis Hazzabis, he's receiving a Nobel because DeepMind has actually been able to diagram over 200 million ways proteins fold with regard to amino acids. And in order to have achieved that outcome, just using traditional, research methods would have taken lifetimes, and it accomplished this, in days. So there are remarkably, in terms of my support for AI, when it comes to the hard sciences, when it comes to healthcare, these things, I am a big supporter. Even when it comes to prosthetics. So, for example, there was a boy born in my church in this past year without limbs. My hope is that by the time he's a teenager, this stuff will have progressed far enough that he could be outfitted with limbs that he could control mentally for arms and legs, and be able to live a relatively speaking, normal life. Just kind of working alongside everybody else and so forth. There's obviously ways that even that tech can be used in all kinds of sick ways, but in terms of the upside, it's tremendous.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be an either or. It tends to be only because of the kind of reductive materialism and the pragmatism governed by our kind of misdirected loves. It's what Paul Tyson, I think, picked up from Lynn White's favorite article. He calls it a progressive dominion theology. The goal is to get the right one there. to integrate a much fuller vision of creation and its meaning and its purposes to guide and govern these things. And there are people out there doing it. Like Paul Tyson is a good example of one. We've done stuff on his show, Returning to Reality, this book on magic, but he also did a very good intro book, Christian Theology of Science, where he evaluates where these things have shifted after Christianity brought its riches, distorted some good Christian sound contributions, and then have created a havoc. And the goal is to reintegrate these the way, even up to the 17th century, a lot of this stuff was still integrated, and bring these things into the right kind of proportion that allows us to have wisdom to know how to go here rather than there, to utilize this very good thing for these things rather than just free it up without boundaries.
That's a great note to end on, Tom. I think one of the things that I get frustrated by is a tendency for maybe the term techno-utopian is too strong for this particular crowd. Maybe they're just techno-optimists. But anytime you try to do what you just described, you're written off as a Luddite. That you just hate change. What we're actually calling for is the work of actually bringing these things into dominion, understood in the right way. Redeeming technologies, and that requires a frank discussion about certain things, like what did we lose when this was introduced? Can we get some of the good things we lost back? That's not anti-technology when you do that.
And I think of another way of putting it is, think of it in the terms of appetite. Not everything you feed appetite to learn and know is good. I mean, curiosity can be is a vice, right? That isn't Luddite. But when intelligence is allowed to freely run in accord with the grains of the universe in a way that recognizes its gift character and certain limits, it is not limited thereby. It actually taps into not merely demonic power or fallen human power, but is oriented by divine grace, which is not anything in creaturely fallen power comparable with. So the thing is, you're not limited. You're not more Luddite. You've actually developed technology that is richer, fuller, more beautiful, good, true, and for flourishing than any of these limited substitutes.
All right. Well, we come to the end of the show, and appreciate the conversation. It's been helpful to me. So as I said, this is a work in progress, and it's helped me to refine some of my thinking on it. Hopefully, I'll be using these theses in a talk I'm going to be delivering at New St. Andrews next month. But since we're at the end, I'd like to say something about an organization or a church that we would like folks to know about. This is Trinity Chattanooga. They reached out to us and asked us to share some news about their church, and so they've written something up, and I'm going to read it. So here it goes. The kingdom of God is growing despite the chaos in America. Isn't that great? I agree. Right now, it's growing in Southeast Tennessee, even in Southeast Tennessee, at Trinity Reformed Church, Chattanooga. If you live in the tri-state area and are looking to be part of the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, the CREC, then visit us this coming Lord's Day. We exist to glorify Christ in every sphere of life, and we will settle for nothing less. Join our mission in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we are building faithful families and restoring men and women to their rightful roles at home, in the church, and everywhere in society. To get connected, contact us at trinitychattanooga.com. That's all just one string of letters, trinitychattanooga.com. Anyway, check it out. Check those folks out. They sound like they're up to some good stuff. All right, well, that's enough for now, and thanks a lot for listening to this episode of the Theology Pugcast. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Theology Pugcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. To learn more about the church, you can visit trinityreformedkirk.com. trinityreformedkirk.com.